How would you feel if tomorrow Warren Buffett suddenly starts taking investment advice from random Twitter posts? Most people would think that he has really got mad because the thing that made him successful in the first place was his refusal to invest in things that he didn't understand. And today, SpaceX is able to make its largest IPO in the world.
A little company that started in a warehouse in El Segundo is now going public for with the largest IPO that ever.
Because Elon Musk stayed biased towards his belief that rockets can be reused, whereas most people thought that it was unrealistic. The same with Steve Jobs.
When Apple, a young fledgling company on the West Coast, invents the Apple II, the first personal computer as we know it today.
Imagine if every time someone disagreed with him and he immediately changes his direction of work, then we would have never seen such crazy Apple products like iPhone, MacBook, and Apple wouldn't have such identity. When we see such examples, we can see a clear pattern that they are all biased towards their beliefs, what made sense to them, and which is strange. Because society and media has portrayed that someone who is biased has a flawed mindset and they are incapable of making sound decisions. Whereas what I have noticed that everyone who built something extraordinary was somewhere deeply and deliberately biased towards something, and that bias wasn't the problem, it was the engine. And these are some of the few examples which shows us that how being biased towards what you believe gets you to better chances of success than being neutral and balancing on everything that everyone else is doing. But because this word has been positioned in such a negative way that people now feel wrong to be biased. Here's what I figured out went wrong with this word. In political disclosures, bias is used to dismiss opposing views as fundamentally irrational. In journalism and media, if a journalist is biased, he is unreliable. In professional and social environment, it is being equated as unfairness and exclusion. And this has turned bias into a scarlet letter, a confession of intellectual dishonesty that nobody wants to wear. But if you strip away that stigma, then being biased is actually a powerful tool. When you are biased towards your vision and a core set of values, you stop wasting energy on noise. At its core, bias literally means systematically leaning towards one thing. Buffett was biased towards businesses he understood. He ignored tech for decades, where everyone was rushing towards it and the entire market thought that he was finished. But now, his returns still beat most of the fund managers alive. And Steve Jobs was biased towards design and intuitiveness of the technology and not the hardware specs, where every company was rushing on the hardware specs. His own engineers even thought that he was wrong. His board thought that he was wrong. And what I have noticed every time I see the business case studies of these people, it was never a personality quirk. It was a chosen direction, held firmly even when the whole room disagreed. The same thing that we considered a flaw is actually a strategy if we used it in the right way. Bias is not just a perspective, it's a decision-making system. When you are genuinely committed to a direction, based on something you have learned and studied and understood, your decisions become faster. The energy stops leaking into a direction. When someone picks up an arguing statement, you don't have a crisis. You just consider it, evaluate it, and you continue. But for the person trying to stay perfectly neutral, every new opinion on his desk becomes a reason to reconsider. Every disagreement causes a full stop for them. And that person is not being careful. That person is stuck because he didn't have moved anything. Where the person who was biased, he maybe have failed, but he has learned something new every time he failed. And this is the cost that being stuck by being perfectly neutral. And I want to make a clear distinction here. What I as a biased man do, I looked on both the sides, choose a direction, and I stay open to information significant enough to change my position. Whereas a blind perspective says, I have already decided and I won't look at any other things that are against my perspective and against my thinking. And here's the most interesting part, that biased people update faster. They don't just restart thinking every time someone disagrees with them. Here's why I am biased towards making content on this channel. I've been studying businesses, startups, and people who build something extraordinary from nothing. Everyone covers their rise, their fall, and the valuations, but nobody talks about the decisions that led them to such levels of success. So I consider that everyone should be biased because bias gives you a speed. If you are wrong, then you will fail faster and learn faster. And if you are right, then you compound faster. And neutrality often delays the success as well as failures. If you are a teacher, then you should be biased towards your students' potential. If you are a mentor, then you should be biased towards action rather than endless advices. And if you are an entrepreneur, then you should be biased towards execution. And if you are a doctor, then you should be biased towards treating your patient in the best possible way. And lastly, if you are a student, then you should be biased towards curiosity. And you will always notice that the person who is biased is successful and the successful person is biased somewhere.